Hi, my name is Phil, and my wife Amy and I are fixing an old house. We want to keep the old floor in the living room. It's solid oak, and about a third of it had been badly damaged by a combination of a leaky roof, 2 Great Danes, and a carpet that hid the damage until the wood was beyond all hope. The rest of the floor isn't perfect, but it has that old character that we want. Plus, we can save quite a bit of money since the construction material costs happen to be pretty high at the moment. To decide whether to repair an old floor, you have to understand whether it's solid wood. If not, then you probably don't want to repair it. Engineered wood flooring may be hard to match old to new. Also, if it's not that old and it is in bad shape, you might just be better off replacing the whole floor. If it's solid wood, it can be refinished more than once, and there's evidence that this floor has been sanded because we can see a bit of waviness in some spots. If the floor is engineered, it has a thin layer of the wood you want, and under that is typically another type of less expensive wood, or a wood product such as compressed fiberboard. Engineered wood can typically be refinished once, and if it is laminate, it cannot be refinished. We could tell the floor was oak. In general, the grain of red and white oak aren't distinct enough to be sure what kind of oak we had, so I cut out a chunk and examined it. When it comes to flooring, there are 2 categories of oak, red and white. Oak is porous, but when you look at the end grain of white oak, the pores are plugged up with what look like bubbles. I used this trick to figure out if it's red or white oak. In red oak, those pores are like little hollow soda straws, and you can literally blow bubbles with soapy water. There are other differences, but this is a pretty reliable test. So, what if the wood isn't oak? If you can cut out a sample, take it to one of your local flooring suppliers. Don't go to a big box store. They don't specialize enough to have an expert who can identify what was used in various decades in the houses in your area. Until we removed the ruined floor, we didn't know the condition of the subfloor. It turns out that the floor had a double-faced tar paper, or waxed construction paper, which keeps the water away from the subfloor. Before you try to rehabilitate a solid wood floor with bad water damage, make sure the subfloor is good. Inspect it. You may need to replace part of the subfloor. When you demolish part of an old floor, if you can cut the boards into shorter pieces, it makes for much easier demolition. Cut between the nails if you can. Fortunately for us, the previous installer chose to nail only where there were floor joists, and conveniently drew lines on the construction paper so we had a pretty good idea where the nails would be. Because we knew there was a good chance of hitting a nail or two, we used an old carbide-toothed saw blade on the circular saw. Once we pried up the wood that we had cut off, we needed to remove the wood that was still slotted between the boards we wanted to keep. We marked the ends of each board so we knew how much wood we'd be trying to slide out from between other boards. If you can, try to remove the boards in a sort of a triangle, since that makes laying in new boards much easier. Keep in mind, if you are nailing solid hardwood down, you'll be nailing into the tongue side, not the groove side. So you work your way across the floor, sliding a groove onto a tongue, nailing, and sliding the next groove onto a tongue. To remove boards from between other boards, we used one of 2 techniques depending on how long the board was and how many nails we thought we would be fighting with. If the board is too long, you'll be trying to hammer out boards against the impossibly high collective strength of several nails. We cut the longer boards lengthwise with a circular saw so we could pry out the groove side, which gave us room to pry out the nail side or tongue side. You might want 2 lengthwise cuts to pry out the middle and then pry out the groove side to make things easier and less likely to damage the adjacent boards. The long cuts were made about half the width of the board or more from the tongue side to avoid the nails. The nails go in diagonally. If you're cutting boards lengthwise to remove them, make sure you know which side is the tongue side, because that is the side with all the nails that will wreck your saw blade. To remove shorter pieces from in between other boards, and I'm talking about something that would only have 1 or 2 nails in it, we simply drilled a 1/2-inch hole in the board, stuck a screwdriver in it, and then hit it with a hammer and hammered it out from in between other boards. It helped to use a flat pry bar once there was enough space. This takes a lot of hard hammering, but the boards come out and leave the adjacent boards undamaged, so you can slot a new board in place. While we had a bunch of subfloor exposed, we took the opportunity to pull any nails that had popped up and replaced them with construction screws, which should help cut down on floor squeaks. Most of the floor squeaks in old houses come from the interaction between the subfloor and floor joists. The nails that the original builder used were smooth, finished nails, not ring shank or twisted helical shank nails, sometimes called deformed shank nails, so more than half of them had popped. Old hardwood floors typically have been expanding and contracting for their entire life, and this one is no exception. That's why you see gaps. You can fill those gaps with various gap filler products when you're refinishing. We plan to make a video on refinishing the floor, but the main problem with the gaps is when you slide the new boards into the old floor. Those gaps will translate to the new flooring, and that's simply not acceptable. Hammering the old floor back tight only works across 1 or 2 boards, because as you close one gap, you open up another the next row over, and across several boards those gaps can add up. To solve that problem, every few boards I cut a spacer out of some scrap floorboards on my table saw. You always have scrap as you go through the bundles of boards. You find a handful that have been damaged in transport with a mashed up tongue or groove, have strap or forklift damage, or have split somewhere. I try not to have the spacer wider than 3/32 of an inch. Any wider and the tongue and groove of the 2 boards will not engage well. If I need a bigger spacer, I try to shift one of the old boards a little by encouraging it to move with a heavy hammer and a block. Those gaps usually taper off into the flooring, so I measure how long a taper I need and hand sand the spacer so it tapers off to nothing. Then I put glue in the gap and tap the spacer into place while I make sure it's supported. I add glue along the spacer and glue it to the tongue side of the board that has already been installed, then install the next board tightly. It's okay if the spacer sticks up from the floor, and you can carefully chisel or plane off that excess. And if you're sanding the floor later, then you could simply sand it flush. If it's sticking up quite high, be careful, because if it splits, the split can run down into the gap you're trying to fill. By the time we're done sanding, you would have to know it's there to find it. After finishing, it will be completely invisible. This nailer is pneumatic, and it is actuated by whacking it with a mallet. That's not just a goofy way of pulling a trigger. It also forces the nailer against the wood so the nail gets set properly, and it tightens up the board against the previous row so you don't have a gap. On our floor, this was a bit of a challenge since the subfloor was a little uneven, and the wood we bought had a few boards that were warped a little, which meant we needed to force them straight. Baby jump. Here's another trick. Where we couldn't slide a board in between existing boards because we were too close to the wall, we sliced off the bottom part of the groove so the board could simply drop into place. Hardwood floors that are nailed down should have a moisture barrier if they are over a crawl space or an old basement with damp problems. Keep in mind, this is not a modern floating floor. We're talking about a traditional, nailed hardwood floor. We've replaced the damaged paper with tar paper, which should keep the rising moisture to a minimum. In a space such as our living room, where the floor is over what is considered a crawl space, although you couldn't actually crawl in there, you need a moisture barrier, and the tar paper means you cannot glue the floor down. If we decided to replace the whole floor, we would have removed the subfloor as well and replaced it with a modern plywood or OSB product, and we probably would have installed tile or a modern floating snap-together engineered floor. The next step will be to use a stainable gap filler and then sand and stain the floor, but that's another video. Se vi ĝuis ĉi tiun videon aŭ eĉ se vi daŭre esperas ke ĝi estus tute en Esperanto, bonvolu ŝati kaj aboni. Kaj ne forgesu klaki sur la sonorilo apud la vorto aboni, por ke vi recivu sigon kiam mi alŝutas alian filmeton. Dankon pro spektado. If you want to do your own do-it-yourself videos yourself, like I do, check out Malik Whitaker's awesome channel, Power Director University. He also has an excellent channel for the mobile version of Power Director if you want to make videos on your cell phone.